We are up and running. So, hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for College, TS, and you making it work your way. My name is Alexandra Walsh, and I am the manager of programs here at the Tourette Association of America. And I will also be your moderator for tonight's program. I am joined by Senior Director of Programs, Wendy Wegman, who will be helping me out with tonight's program. So, hi, Wendy, and thank you so much for joining us. Tonight's program is being provided as part of the Tourette Health and Education Program in partnership with the CDC. The views expressed by speakers and moderators do not necessarily reflect the official policies of the Department of Health and Human Services, nor does the mention of trade names, commercial practices, or organizations imply endorsement by the U.S. government. After the session, we'll be asking attendees to partake in a brief survey to let us know what you thought of tonight's program. Tonight's session is made possible by support from the CDC. So not only is your feedback important to us, but also demonstrates to the CDC the value of programming like tonight. With that said, our wonderful speakers for tonight are Michael Leopold. Michael is a career coach, human resources consultant, and public speaker. As founder and president of Leopold Talent Consulting, he offers comprehensive career consulting services to individuals and training programs to organizations. As a professional with Tourette Syndrome and ADHD, he leverages his lived experience to help organizations hire and retain neurodivergent talent. Michael has held progressive HR and consulting roles at Deloitte, Xerox, Two Sigma Investments, and Mercer. Next, but certainly not least, we have Eric G. Eric was diagnosed with Tourette Syndrome at age 9 and trained to be a TAA Rising Leader in 2023. He is a graduate from the University of Michigan with a BS in biopsychology. In his free time, Eric enjoys spending time with friends, running, and reading. And currently, Eric is a TAA intern with the Medical and Scientific Affairs Board. With that being said, I will pass it off to our presenters, and thank you so much.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Alex, for that wonderful introduction. So yeah, this is our webinar. It's kind of just going over what to expect for college and kind of how to make it work your way. We obviously have a presentation part of it, but we also want people to kind of be interactive and feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation and kind of anything that comes up. Well, we should have time afterwards for those to answer those. But yeah, so the first thing that we really wanted to talk about was regarding disclosure and self-advocacy. I think a really common question that we get, especially for people who are going into college, is related to kind of if I should disclose, when should I disclose, how do I self-advocate for myself, especially because of the nature of, being in college. You are an adult now on your own, and kind of learning how to navigate that is super important. So kind of going over disclosure during college, what that really looks like. I guess I should maybe start with a little bit of background about myself. As Alex mentioned, I went to the University of Michigan. For me, that was a really large school. It was a huge state school with probably over 30,000 students. And I was also out of state. So that was probably about halfway across the country for me. So I really didn't know anyone going in. So for me, one of the biggest questions I had was, should I disclose? How should I disclose to, a whole new environment of people who are around me? So, I think for me, what really helped is really considering the following. I think at the end of the day, with self-disclosure, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. In terms of if you want to disclose, that ultimately is up to you. Everyone with TS, as you probably know, is very different in terms of how people, react to it, how people explain it, and, the different kinds of symptoms that you might have, and really being able to consider those. Also considering the situations involved with self-disclosure. So for instance, if you're in a classroom setting, if you're in a smaller classroom versus a larger classroom setting, whether or not that would affect disclosure. For me, a lot of the classes I took were large classes with probably over hundreds of students. And obviously self-disclosure is a little bit hard in those settings. So you don't feel like how you have to, tell the entire lecture hall about it. Maybe even just telling the person you're sitting next to about it is enough. If you're in a smaller classroom setting, it's a little bit easier because you can tell your classmates about it, your peers. But again, it's ultimately up to you, and it's kind of what you feel most comfortable with. Group projects is another situation maybe to think about. If you're working with other students in a group project, whether you should kind of disclose if you want to. Roommates, if you do have any, and we'll go a little bit later up into roommates in a later slide. More specifically, if you do end up having roommates, kind of how to go about that. And then also communicating with your professors about accommodations, which I'll actually cover in the next slide as well. So self-advocacy, as I talked about, especially when you're going into college, you are going to be, for the most part, on your own. You're transitioning from high school into kind of university. A lot of times you're going to be living on your own. You're going to have to learn how to do things on your own. And part of that comes with learning how to be a self-advocate, how to kind of explain your condition to other people, explaining what Tourette's is. Um, so having that skill is obviously really important. So how do you go about that, right? In terms of self-advocacy, there is really I like to kind of group it into two different self-advocacy types. One is around faculty, another one is around classmates. When you're around faculty, there's kind of how should you go about explaining your Tourette's and tic symptoms, right? Um, don't be afraid, to ask for resources like lecture recordings or, texting accommodations, but also being able to communicate with your school's disability office. Most colleges should have one. Really being, not afraid to reach out to them for support. I think especially, going into college, your needs might change, what works for you accommodations wise. Don't be afraid to work with them to kind of identify what those needs are and also kind of be able to know the fact that, it might change over time. Advocacy around classmates. I think for me, I remember my first year, what really helped for me was actually preparing a script. This was in a smaller classroom setting, so I remember the first day when we began to introduce ourselves, really just preparing a script for myself to explain what Tourette's is. I'm Eric. I have Tourette syndrome. It's a nervous tic disorder. It involves kind of motor and vocal tics. So you might notice me clearing my throat or blinking my eyes. That's what it is. And it really helps, right? It helps to kind of have something set for you to say that you kind of can practice beforehand. But at the end of the day, again, do not feel like you have to self-disclose. I think, in my opinion, it's a personal choice. Um, and, it's whatever you feel most comfortable with. So this is a sample email template. This was actually created by one of our rising leaders, Maya. This is a template that she uses in her emails for college professors. Um, talking in terms of disclosing Tourette's to a college professor, kind of what to write. Um, I think this kind of helps capture a lot of the important points, explaining what Tourette's is, also explaining any like co-occurring conditions. Maybe if you have a particular type of tic that's frequent, maybe mentioning that. And also kind of just introducing yourself. I think in general, it's important to establish those relationships with your professors and kind of be able to develop that with them, getting them to kind of know you outside the class is also important. Um, you can also, you don't have to disclose over email. You can also choose to just do it in person if that's something you feel more comfortable with. So, meeting a professor after class and just kind of explaining to them what Tourette's is and kind of talking about those as well. And then, in addition to talking about disclosure and self-advocacy, I think something else that's super important is really thinking about your support net, right? This is kind of in general too, but as you go into college, you're going to meet a bunch of people from all sorts of different backgrounds and people you've never known before, and really being able to create a support net for yourself, kind of helping with your mental health, physical health, things like that. Um, that terms in terms of, creating relationships, whether it's with peers, faculty or advisors, finding those who kind of um, you feel comfortable around is incredibly important. Joining clubs and student organizations. So for me in college, I was on my school's running club, and for me that was just a way for me to kind of um, reset and find a way kind of outside of school where I can meet other people and other friends. Another student group you might want to consider in college is something that might be related to disability. Other students who might have shared identity. being able to find, kind of students who are similar in that way and really being able to connect with others through that. Um, there's also, online support groups. If you're someone who prefers to do things more online as opposed to in person, I know the TAA has a lot of kind of young adult support groups, kind of maybe thinking about registering for one of those, finding people who are similar age as you and finding connection through that way as well. And in general, just, practicing healthy habits, finding hobbies outside of just your professional and academic obligations, and really being able to find a way to kind of develop kind of healthy coping mechanisms.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Eric. My name is Michael, and I'll be leading the next section on accommodations and then a little bit of our final session. And then I'll hand things off to Eric again. But a little bit about my background. Like I said, my name is Michael. I grew up in Indiana, been living in New York City since 2016, but did my undergrad at Yale in Connecticut, and I'll talk a little bit about how the accommodations work. Try to keep it general, like things that are true for all colleges or in general, all institutions, kind of how it works. And then I'll note where there are some things that might be unique or specific to the institution that you're at. So if we can go to the next slide here, I want to start by just chatting a little bit about what some differences are between high school and college when it comes to the accommodation space. The big, maybe one of the most notable ones is the lack of 504 or IEPs. Those are K through 12 specific plans, and it doesn't mean you have no structure in college or no rights. You absolutely do. It just works a little bit differently. It tends to be more focused on what functional accommodations can we provide to just level the playing field a little bit more when it comes to like your classroom or your living arrangements. Um, so there isn't that process that a lot of you may have gone through at some point in grade school. Actually, your parents may have been involved, where they meet with the teachers and every year they make a plan. What do you need to be successful? They evaluate the plan. I would say in college it's a little more streamlined and in a lot of ways it's simpler and hopefully easier. Not necessarily, I can't promise it will be, but it should be a more streamlined process. Whereas in high school, it can take months or sometimes years to fully get that IEP. Some people have better experiences than others. In college, this process is usually just days or weeks, but there are some exceptions there. Normally, it's pretty quick. The second big difference is that you initiate the process. So in high school, in grade school, often your parents are the ones that, or maybe a teacher first notices that you're ticking or you have some symptoms and they wonder if maybe some testing is warranted. But largely it's something you do in conjunction with your parents, kind of leading that process. In college, the onus is really on you to drive that process. And I hope that doesn't sound scary or intimidating. I will say that it sounds worse than it actually is in practice. I think you will rise to the occasion and rise to the challenge. In reality, what it means is you disclose and kind of take ownership of that, when you choose to disclose and when you don't. You set up a meeting with the accommodations office, and then you make sure that each of your professors knows the accommodations you get. And that's about it. It's not like this big thing that you have to do and you're going to all these meetings and you got to plan them and organize them on your calendar. It's usually pretty straightforward, and the accessibility office is there to guide you through that process. On that note, the accessibility office will be your main point of contact on anything relating to your diagnosis in college and accommodations. They have a few different names. A lot of universities will refer to it as the accessibility office or the resource and accessibility office. Could be the disability resource center. There's a few names, but they're functionally the same thing. This is basically the group, usually a physical office or building on campus. This is the group that you go to ensure you get accommodations and request them, and also where you go if there are problems. Maybe a professor isn't quite doing what the accommodation says they're supposed to do. This is the place you go. Or maybe the accommodations aren't working and you need to try a different one. That's where you would go. The final big difference here is the focusing on from having a plan, like an individualized education plan, to having kind of a letter is what it boils down to. Basically, the accessibility and accommodations office will draft a letter for you that says, usually doesn't say what your diagnosis is. Normally, what it just has is the accommodations that you get, and it's basically a letter that either they will send to your professors, or often you will make sure your professors get it, and we'll talk about that. And that is how you make sure you get the accommodations you need for each semester. And on the next slide, we'll get into some detail on this. Basically, how the process works is you reach out to the accessibility office. Now, you can do this as early as once you've been admitted to the college. And that's honestly a great time to do it. Like if they have I don't know if your colleges have like an admitted students weekend event, or maybe you're going to visit campus. Once you've been admitted, that's a great time to start that. And you ideally wouldn't wait until, first day of classes. You could do if you have like an orientation or something, that could possibly be the time for it. But ideally a little bit before that, because there might be some paperwork you have to do, get some documentation from your doctor and stuff like that. So also it's possible they might allow you to do this virtually and just kind of meet with them online. Depends again on the university and how they work. But what I did for Yale was, but when I was admitted, there was an admitted students couple day event. And while I was there, I set up a meeting with the accessibility office, or maybe before the meeting, I emailed them and set it up. And basically, I met with them. They tend to be very friendly people. No one's gonna go work in this kind of job unless they love helping people with disabilities get accommodations and support them and see you thrive. So they're usually wonderful, lovely people, and so they're also just great friends and allies to have as you go through college. But you'll set up that meeting with them. You'll meet with them and share a little bit about your background and your story, and then kind of what you're looking for in terms of accommodations. And you may not know what you're going to need. It's not like you've been to college before. You may not know what you don't know. So you can talk to them about some of the accommodations maybe you had in high school. A lot of those will be things you could also get in college, although you may or may not need them, just because college is different in a lot of ways. There tends to be a little less busy work. I think in high school, when I think back to high school, it was a lot of homework assignments. I'd go home and get something done, and then I'd turn it in the next day, or a couple days later. It was a lot of just kind of little homework assignments and busy work. College tends to have less of that, broadly speaking. It tends to have more exams, a little more projects, and writing papers, maybe. It does depend on the major and the program you're in. But I found that the nature of coursework meant that my accommodations were different. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. And your accommodations will likely change as you go through college, depending on the classes that you're taking that semester. But generally, you meet with the accommodations office and or the accessibility office, and they will ask you for some documentation from your doctor saying that you have a diagnosis, and then what is the functional impact. So it could be, I have Tourette's and my tics come out a lot at night, so I need a private dorm. I need a dorm room that's just a single, so that I'm not ticking in front of others. It could be extra time. We're all used to hearing about that one. Things like that. And then you deliver that note to the accessibility office, and usually the rest is pretty straightforward. They review it, they document everything that they need, and then they tell you how the process works. Ultimately, this culminates in a accommodation letter that you will usually share with your professors. There's an asterisk by that because some universities do it a little differently. They might actually just, on your behalf, they'll email the letter to your professors every semester. I think more commonly what I've heard is that they will give you that letter. You might receive it in person, you might get it over email, but basically it's a letter that has your name on it, and it says, like, normally it doesn't say the diagnosis. It will usually just have the accommodations that you're entitled to, and you will deliver that to your professor. What I personally did is I would wait until classes started, and then maybe sometime in the first week or two of classes, maybe not on the first day, although you could. I'd wait until the end of the class session for that day and maybe wait for the other students to leave, and then I'd go up and approach the professor and deliver the letter, usually with a disclosure. And I'll say I have Tourette's. I'm working with the accessibility office, and I receive accommodations for that, and this letter has some of the details on that. And normally they're like, okay, cool, like thank you, and they take the letter, and that's that. Some of them might ask you some questions if they're curious and they're friendly and about it. But usually that is how it goes, that part of the process. And then, like I said, you can revisit or adjust these accommodations anytime. Don't feel like you're locked into it. Your tics change, your co-occurring conditions will evolve, and that's normal. And your classes will change. I needed, as I got through my program, I was a cognitive science major. I had a lot of exams early on in college, so there's certain accommodations you might get for that. Maybe having exams extra time or taking it in a quiet room with no distractions. As I got further in my major, I was mostly writing papers. I didn't have as many exams, so I actually didn't really need the accommodations as I went through my program. But everyone's different, but just know that you can and should feel encouraged to change those so that they keep working for you. All right, I think the next slide here, we've got examples and timing. So there's no exhaustive list of examples. I put a few on here. The notable one that a lot of people ask about is around housing. Can I get a single dorm? And absolutely, that's something that you could request if you think you need it. I think there's something to be said for like just the social value of having a roommate. But if you want that, I had a single dorm all through college, and what was nice was I was part of a broader, we called them suites, but basically I'd have a single dorm and I'd share like a living room or a common space with, 3 to 5 other people. And so that was nice because I had my place I could go to when my tics were bad, or at night, my tics tend to flare, so I wasn't, bothering anybody, or, I just had my place to be me. But I could just step out and be with my room or be with the suite mates very easily. So find out what works for you. We'll also talk about later on like whether maybe just living at home and commuting is an option for you. That's also something that you can consider if your college is close to home. Um, as far as timing, I would say before the semester starts is great. I realize that you kind of don't know what accommodations you're going to need until you know your class schedule. Also, one accommodation you can get, this is a little pro tip here. I did not do this, but I'm jealous of the kids that did. You can get an accommodation for executive dysfunction that allows you to choose classes in advance, or maybe they open the class registration site like a week or two early for you. I can't guarantee that you'll get it, but I have heard of students that got it, and that will go a long way at getting into some of the more competitive classes where they tend to cap the class size. And also just gives you time to figure out, all right, what classes do I need? And then what accommodations am I going to need for that? A lot of times the professors will post what's called a syllabus, and that's kind of the outline of how the class will work. And you might say, hey, this class has a lot of exams. I'm going to need some extra time. If my tics are bad, I might need a separate room that I can take those exams in. Or you may say, hey, this class looks really, piece of cake. I don't need any accommodations or something. You can decide that for each semester, and then you let the accessibility office know what you need. Usually they set up a meeting with you as you get through the program. Maybe your second, your third, your fourth year of college. They might do this over email. It varies by university. Usually they want you to meet with them at least once a semester, though, in person. But that's how that will work. And then whenever you're having challenges with the accommodations, or let's say like midway through the semester, you get a new tic. And it like, I all of a sudden I'm getting this, my hand twitching tic is flaring. I can't take notes anymore in class because I'm constantly twitching my arm and it's in a lot of pain. This happened to me about halfway through college. So I went to the accessibility office and asked them, I said, can I get a note taker? Like I can't keep up with how fast the lecture is going, and my arm is in a lot of pain because of the tics. And immediately within a week or so they got me a note taker. So there's things like that. Don't be afraid to ask them for it. The accessibility office is there to help you be successful. And on that note, keys to success, a few kind of themes, high level, that we've hit on here. Great to be proactive and be organized and find ways that work for you. I don't know, when I was a kid and someone would tell me to be organized, it was like so stressful. I was like, I just envision someone who like has their life together and they have perfect calendars and spreadsheets and everything is color coded and like organized. Find what works for you. It doesn't have to be that. There's so many apps and tools and technologies out there that assist us in staying organized. Hey, if it works for you and you're getting to class on time and you're able to make your doctor appointments and do your life activities, then you're good. That's what counts. There's no one right way to do this. Communication is great. I also agree with Eric on kind of writing out a disclosure speech and memorizing it, or at least, practicing it a little bit. That makes it easy. Keep records, and this would be more maybe like what accommodations you got and which one, like how it went. Did it work for you or not? The Resource Accessibility Office will also be doing some record keeping, but it's good for you to have that too. Remember that you have rights, and you are entitled to reasonable accommodations that will help you have a more equal chance. And that's the last point here around accommodations is we're not giving an advantage. It really is about trying the best we can to level the playing field, and it's never going to be perfect. There's so many ways that our diagnoses impact us that we just can't functionally accommodate. But the hope is we can level that playing field a little more for you. All right, and now we're getting into living on campus. Now, this is a separate topic that does kind of overlap some with the accommodations. And really that title you see might as well have a question mark at the end because like that is a question in of itself. Do we live on campus? Do we live off campus? Do we live at home? If we're at a community college, we might be able to do a commute to school. There's a lot of considerations there and a lot of things that you want to consider as you go through this. It's a very personal choice. And just because someone made one choice doesn't mean you have to make that same choice. All right, so whether you live on campus or not, we can really break that down into two kind of buckets of factors. There's on the left, the internal factors, what am I going through? My tics, my co-occurring conditions. And on the right are more external factors. So things like, the cost of it, medication, where are your doctors, how easily or difficult is it for you to get to class, if you live from home, or if you live off campus on an apartment or something. All of these are important to consider. A lot of us with tics and in the tic disorder community have anxiety. And so, yeah, like whether college is already very different than high school. So it might be a little bit smoother of a transition if you take that first year or two and you're living at home and you make that adjustment gradually. Another thing to consider is executive functioning. A lot of us have challenges with executive functioning and skills related to that. So in college, the onus is on you to remember to eat your meals a day and take your medicine and manage a class schedule and all of that. That can be a little different than high school. So that's something else to keep in mind. If you take medication daily, the question of like your doctor could also factor into this. So I grew up in Indiana. I went to school in Connecticut. This was a big factor for me was like, what do I do with my doctors? Also, like if you're gonna get on the college's health insurance plan, you might have to switch over and get some doctors that are closer to your college campus. Or not. Maybe you'll be able to work it out where you have a winter holiday break and a fall break, and you can see your doctors, when you're close to home for breaks or, during the summer, things like that. See what's going to work for you. Realistically, you may even have a couple doctors. You may have your neurologist in your college town, and then you've got the psychiatrist you see back at home. Uh, Use your first year to try out kind of what works best for you because it can work different ways. I One of the most stressful things is just getting your medication, honestly, because oftentimes things like stimulants and stuff are controlled, and they don't want to just give you a year supply of it. So you do have to see your doctor often enough. And there's a little bit of that can be a little tricky. But that should factor in as well when you think about where do I want to live. Um, and then, think about the distance to your medical providers, so that you're not having to travel too far to get to your doctor. And then the last thing is accessibility of the campus. Like, is your campus on a big hill or in a hilly location where you're gonna have to walk up these hills a lot? If they don't have a bus, that could be difficult. Or if you're in crutches or a wheelchair, that could be difficult. So thinking about that as well, how physically accessible is your campus would probably be the final consideration I'd make in terms of, do I live at home? Do I live on or off campus? That kind of thing. Housing accommodations. So, for this one, we touched on this a little bit. That one of the accommodations you can get is having a single, private dorm, that kind of thing. And what that would take is having your doctor, it could be your psychologist, your neurologist, your neuropsychiatrist, the physician that you go to for your Tourette needs. That would be a great person to write this letter. It could be combined. Basically, it's the same letter that they write to request other accommodations for you. And probably you want to get this before you start college because this usually need to be submitted to the accessibility office a little bit in advance so they can get you the dorm and all of that. But this could be one way to really give you a lot of just like that emotional and neurological space that you need. You can request a single room. You can request rooms with or buildings with elevators, air conditioning, things like that. Off-campus housing can be a little trickier. That usually functions independently of the university. Now, your accessibility office might be able to point you in a good direction of a list of apartments or something, but they usually can't do more than that because that's handled separately. And I think that's about it. Now, Eric will take over from here and talk about roommates.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Michael. Um, yeah, I think especially with roommates, there is kind of a general fear, from my experience talking with people with Tourette's, kind of if I should get a roommate or not, it is again a personal decision, and I can maybe walk through kind of my own experience and also kind of considering both the pros and cons of both choices. I remember for me when I first began college, I actually was part of it was a living learning community program. So how it worked was that a bunch of students would be in the same dorm, as part of a kind of same academic program thing. And one of the requirements was for people to have roommates. Everyone was required to live in a double room and to have roommates. And for me, I felt like it was challenging because of my own threats. I felt more comfortable living in a single room. I felt like it would have been better for me and also for my roommate, because I do take at night. Um, so what I did was I reached out to my housing accommodations office, to the disability office as well. As Michael mentioned, the people who are at your university's disability office, they're there because they want to help people with disabilities, get them the resources that they need. But I think really a part of that was learning how to be proactive. This was something I emailed them, months before the actual semester started, making sure that kind of they knew about my condition and kind of the needs kind of that I needed, in terms of a single room. Again, it's obviously a personal choice, but having a roommate can be beneficial because there's a social aspect to being in college and having a friend already making potentially someone with your roommate. Um, but it's also there are some kind of advantages to having a single room, right? As Michael kind of alluded to previously, having a single room is really a great space for you to decompress, outside of classes, when you go home or go to your dorm, getting to actually just kind of tick freely, without having to worry about someone else in the room. If you're someone who ticks at night, also being able to kind of have the freedom to do that. If you do end up choosing a roommate, there are lots of ways you can do that rather than just kind of going in blind. A lot of colleges will offer you the opportunity to choose a roommate. If you want to, find on social media, or some schools might have like websites where people can go on forums where they can go on there and find other people. So if you feel comfortable getting a roommate, that's something you personally want, finding someone who might be able to understand, be able to disclose that, and being able to work through that as well. So there are lots of kind of pros and cons to both choices. Again, it's a personal choice at the end of the day, whether or not you want to have a roommate or not. And yeah. So yeah, the last point is really just to be proactive. Again, this is a very lengthy process, getting all the accommodations that you might need, whether it's housing or it's related to in the classroom, disclosing. I think it's just really important to kind of think about those things ahead of time. For me, I'm not the best at kind of planning ahead, but I know that especially going to college, one thing I like to do is, before every class, is to actually just look through the syllabus of every class and kind of looking at what every class format looks like. Are the exams going to be in person? Are they going to be, virtually? Are the classes going to be virtually? Are they going to be required in person? Thinking about the setting, kind of being able to anticipate that. Especially, I think everyone who's on the webinar now is doing a great job already, being proactive and thinking about college ahead of time. But, being able to, for instance, reaching out to your doctor, right? If you anticipate potentially getting a doctor's note, right? If you anticipate needing accommodations in college. And don't be afraid, again, utilize the disability office as a resource. They're a huge asset to you. They want to, at the end of the day, they do want to help you out. But part of that is being proactive, being able to reach out on your own, being able to kind of explain what's going on, but also being able to, identify your needs and telling them what you need to succeed in college. So, yeah. And then that is, we do, yeah, that's the end of our presentation. Thank you all so much. If you want to donate, we have a QR code here. And then I think Wendy, you want to take it away for these?
Oh yeah, no, that's great. You're doing great. If you go to the next slide, Eric, I think there's one more slide. Oh, our gala, and I think you can do this too, Eric. Eric is interning
Yeah.
here. He knows all about it. Go ahead, you can take it away.
Yeah, no, so we have a few events coming up. Our gala just happened, but our TitCon for 2026, that's for next year, is actually going to be in Nashville, Tennessee. So that's going to be in person. We're looking for presenters right now. So if you want to do a presentation yourself in person, you can sign up to do that. Or if you just want to attend, you want to go there. We have all sorts of different topics at these conventions. Um, all sorts of, support. It's for all sorts of different age groups. So, whether you're an adult or you're a teen or you're a parent who's kind of looking for more information, there's definitely a lot to look out for. So yeah, feel free to kind of, I don't think we have a QR code here, but Wendy, if you want to just like put the QR code for the TICCON 26, if you have it.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
actually just put an outreach email for it so that
Yeah.
people can reach out. I'll put the link to apply
Cool,
for
cool.
it to present as well. Sounds good.
And then lastly, we do have a post survey for you guys to fill out. This is for our youth programming and our community presentations. Again, as Alex mentioned, this is, the filling out these surveys helps with our funding, kind of helping to fund future presentations like these, providing your feedback as well. Or if you have any ideas for future programming at the TAA, you can also feel free to add those as well. Yeah, so let's see. So I'll keep this slide on, but we can go on to present questions and answers right now. And it looks like we do have a few questions coming up. Let's see. So our first question is, what if you're going to a trade or certificate program? How does all of what you just said apply?
Hmm.
Yeah, so I personally don't have much like personal experience with trade school. Michael, do you happen to have any?
I don't. I've worked with some candidates that went to trade school and got accommodations. Some of it will depend on are you there in person or not. A lot of times you're commuting and living at home. Not always though. I think a lot of the considerations broadly are similar. With like what accommodations. I mean, you would still be entitled to accommodations for any kind of like coursework that you're doing. They may look a little different, especially if something's very like the trade you're doing is very hands-on. But there would usually still be a contact person that you'd work with to get those accommodations. You'd go to a doctor, get a letter, send that in to the resource office, accessibility office, whatever they call it, and then and go from there. So some, I would say higher level, some of the considerations would be the same. And then just a lot of specifics based on what your program is.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think, whether or not you go to trade school or a kind of a traditional university, you should be able to have access to those kinds of accommodations. It is, again, a legal right that you have. Tourette's is protected under ADA. So really being able to, I think that's something to consider, yeah. Right? Let's see. Our next question is, I have coprolalia and have been reported to the school dean because of my tics. They understand and are supportive, but I'm always worried about getting reported over and over. Any tips or advice? Yeah, I guess I just wanted to first off say that I know that's a really challenging situation to be in. I think, especially with kind of tick symptoms, it's if you feel comfortable, disclosing that to the college you're in, kind of I think with college classes, a large part of it does depend on kind of what the classroom setting looks like. So, for instance, if you're in a larger class or a smaller class, maybe even consider, when you're registering for classes, if being in a smaller classroom setting would be better, right? You feel more comfortable disclosing to your classmates in a smaller classroom setting. Maybe preparing a script. I know that the TA, we also have I have TS cards that you can hand out to people. It kind of explains all the different things about Tourette's. So, and then Michael, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think this is one where disclosure is gotta that's super important. For those of us that have mild tics, we can sometimes get away with not disclosing. Unfortunately, with things like coprolalia, there's more of that pressure to disclose, I think, and also more benefit to you in disclosing. I totally agree with Eric on I have in my wallet my where is it? My Tourette's card. I take it everywhere with me. You can't see it. There we go. But I have two actually now in here apparently, but I strongly recommend that just to have as kind of last resort if you're having anything and you just don't want to verbally explain it, or just to back up that. But I think this is one with coprolalia where you'd want to let the professors know in advance, and ideally also your classmates, the people who sit around you or your friends in the class. That could be also one where I would talk to either the professor, or at least first talk to the accessibility office about how best to handle that. Because if you feel comfortable disclosing, it might be in your best interest to disclose to the entire class. If you want to, don't want to, that's obviously your right and your choice. But you might find then that after having done that disclosure, it becomes a little more normalized and you're not getting reported for what you can't control. So I would say I would encourage you to really own the disclosure piece in a situation like that. I think that's really how you set yourself up for success.
Yeah, and actually, I wanted to add to that as well. I think especially for college, one of the actually great things about it is that a lot of the classes are actually virtual. So they might have in-person settings, but a lot of lectures might be recorded, and a lot of students actually end up not going to class and they'll just watch the lecture recording for later. So, I think if you're not currently in college, when you're if you're applying right now or you're thinking about which college you want to go to, maybe thinking about schools that have that option. I do know personally that a lot of schools have it, so it's not just like a rare kind of thing to find. A lot of schools do lecture recordings. If you're in college right now, thinking about the classes, looking at past syllabi, and kind of looking at if they offer those kind of lecture recordings, because a lot of students do utilize that, and they think that would also kind of help too.
Mhm.
And then our next question is, do you recommend any online TS support groups? I haven't been having any luck finding any. I think, Wendy, you are probably more familiar with this than I am. If you want to.
Yeah, I just put it in the chat, Eric. I
Okay.
saw the question come in, and I put in the chat the link to online support groups here at the TAA. We have some for young adults. The fall online support group is already closed. I think it's ending soon, but there's actually a button on the bottom to apply for the winter group, and we'll reach out to you as soon as that goes live, so you have that information. If you have a chapter local to you, they may have some support groups as well. So you're welcome to reach out to us. I'll put the best way to reach out to us in the chat too.
Cool, awesome. Thank you. And then our next question is, it's about the, I guess that I mentioned the TA cards. Does the TA send out anything else? Any kind of other resources related to things like that?
Yeah, so the question was, do we have do we send out resources? Is that
Yeah, so like I mentioned the TAA cards, which we do, I believe we do send those out to people who might need them. But any other kinds of things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I'll put in the chat to reach out to support@tourette.org. The I Have Tourette card is available in hard copies that we can send. It's available on your phone. You can pull it right up on your phone. And it's also printable on the website. I put a guide for young adults in the chat. You can click on that link, but that's also available in hard copy. So we're funded by the CDC to be able to provide these resources for you. So if you need hard copies of things because you want to give some information to people, just general, what is Tourette? We have a guide like that as well. Please reach out. I'll put support@tourette.org in the chat, and we'll send you whatever it is that you request that you need.
Cool, cool. And then our next question is, do you think it would be realistic for me to request priority registration on the grounds of me needing to make my scheduled classes earlier in the day because my medication makes me tired the longer I'm up, and that I can't, my tics get a lot worse when I'm in the classroom setting for too many hours at a time. I think that's 100% valid, and I think that's a really realistic reason. Um, I think if you explain it just like you did here, and getting if you have a physician who can also vouch for you for that, I think that'll be very realistic, and being able to explain not just your condition but also kind of how that affects you and why you need that early registration. So, Michael, if you want to add anything to that.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that's absolutely it. That could be a good reason for it, and one to talk to your doctor about, and they can include that reasoning. And if they write a letter for you, yeah, generally for the like early registration, the reasons for those would be you have like there's a neurological reason for why you need a certain class or need to be in certain classes that would otherwise you wouldn't have access to. So something like this, where, hey, I need to have most of my classes be in the morning and I can't risk those classes filling up, that's absolutely a valid reason. I would talk to your doctor about that and how to put that in words. They would write that out for you.
Yeah. And it looks like our last question of the day. I have vocal tics, and a lot of people, when I scream, say, "Is that a dog?" Do you have any tips for how we can move toward with this issue when it happens? I guess, I think as we kind of mentioned before, it's if you feel like disclosure would kind of help you with a situation like this. I guess I don't completely know the full context behind it, but from my understanding, it's either the students don't know that someone in the classroom has Tourette's, or they're trying to poke fun at it. I think either way, it's if you feel comfortable, I think it's important to kind of be able to disclose that. And if you feel like it is kind of an issue of like conflict between your peers, potentially bringing that up with your professor or like a disability office to kind of escalate things further. So.
Yeah, Eric, I love how you answered that. That you said that better than I could have. Thank you. That was spot on. Yeah, ditto on that.
Cool. And it looks like I don't think we have any other questions at the moment. So, um,
Yeah, if you have any other questions, put them in the chat or the Q&A rather for Eric and Michael. We have a few more minutes. And I know somebody asked a question. I meant to answer it live. So I'm not sure you can see the answer, but I mean, I meant to answer it by typing it in. I'm not sure you can see it, but they asked a question about a chapter. So you can reach out to that email that I put on there, support@tourette.org, and find out any information about chapters in your area, support groups in your area, resources that we have that we can send to you. And, you know, if you do need support at college, if you do have any further questions, I know Michael and Eric would be happy to answer them, you know, if I sent them off to them, those questions. And also we do have a group of people, excuse me, that volunteer for us that support college students with maybe knowing what accommodations they need, the next steps they need to take. We do support if you're really struggling at school and you need some advice or some help, or maybe you just need somebody to be on and support explaining things to the Office of Disabilities as well. And we can do all that here for you too. So please reach out, that support@tourette.org. And it looks like
Cool.
maybe
And
some other
we did
questions.
have a couple other questions just come in. The first one was asking that they missed the first half of the meeting. If there's going to be a recording, yes, there will be a recording that will be sent out. The next one, and I think Michael, you would actually probably be the best person to ask this, so I don't
I'd
want
love to answer
not
this
trying to
one.
put this in your court, but what about explaining your accommodation to a potential internship or employer?
Yeah, you know, it's an excellent question. My background in this, I work as a career coach, and my background is in human resources, which is the department of a larger company that would help with making sure people get accommodations. Generally, it's actually a little bit more streamlined and straightforward than college, because companies are very afraid of a lawsuit or anything. So when someone comes forward with that, it is usually with a request for accommodations or even a disclosure of a diagnosis. That's usually taken very seriously. And you could tell your manager if your company has like a human resources department or whoever the name that was on your offer letter. You know, if you don't feel comfortable talking to your supervisor about it, and if they do have like a designated hiring or human resources person, that would be the other person you could go to. Legally, you are entitled to reasonable accommodations in the workplace, and the process is like an even more kind of what is it called? Like narrowed down process from high school, especially, where basically you make the disclosure, ideally to someone that handles the employee records, the human resources department. They will request documentation, and it can be a letter from your doctor that says you have this diagnosis and the doctor is recommending accommodations. You would take that letter and give it to your contact person at the company. And then the difference with the one tricky thing with getting accommodations in the workplace is usually they're not disability experts. They just know that they got to follow the law and get you accommodations. So best case scenario, you already have some ideas in mind of what accommodations would be helpful for you, but you would work with them. It's kind of an iterative process. You would tell them, hey, I would like to have like noise canceling headphones, or I would like to be able to come into the office or come and do some work on Saturdays or something like that, that they might push back a little bit and say, we don't want you doing that. You know, can we modify it a little bit? I asked once at a company if I could bring a tape recorder and record meetings so that I could listen to them later. I have ADHD, and they said no. They were like, we can't. There's too much confidential stuff. We just can't reasonably make that work. But instead, we can follow up. You know, where we give you notes or something. You know, there's other things that they can do. So be open to there may be some back and forth. But yes, you do get accommodations even at an internship. You would want to come forward pretty early with that. Ideally, right as you get that offer letter and you know you want to accept, I would say once you accept it first and then ask for the accommodations. But yeah, usually that's a faster process. You just got to get that documentation from your doctor, and then have some ideas of what you want, because the company probably won't really know what to do with it. They're not going to know the perfect solution, so you'll work with them and take the lead on that. Yeah, great question there.
Well, you guys are both completely awesome. This was a very informative session, and I really thank you both for being on. It looks like those are all the questions that we have for tonight. I'm looking forward to sending this out to our registrants, and there will be the recording that we'll send out to everyone that attended. But I actually think this is just going to be a terrific resource as college students are getting closer to applying to college and reaching out to us as well. So thank you both very much. It was very helpful, as one of our attendees said. So everybody who's been on, thank you so much for coming on and participating. Like we said, these programs are brought to you from a cooperative agreement between the Tourette Association of America and the Centers for Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. So thank you again for being on, and please reach out to us if you do need anything. And thank you, Michael, and thank you, Eric, as well. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.